On a Sunday afternoon in March 1996, Alicia Showalter Reynolds set out for a short drive to the mall. She never came home. Her car was found abandoned on the side of Route 29. A flat tire and her belongings still inside, but Alicia had disappeared. Soon, investigators would learn that other women had been stopped along that same highway by a man asking for help, and they had narrowly escaped. Alicia's story would become one of the most haunting unsolved mysteries along Virginia's Route 29 corridor. Before we go further into the story, please consider subscribing to Cold Case Whisperer. It's much appreciated, and it helps us keep bringing you real cold case stories like this one. Alicia Showalter Reynolds was 24 years old, a special education teacher at Smithland Elementary School in Harrisonburg, Virginia. She had been married to her husband Mark Reynolds for just over 2 years, and the couple had recently moved into their first home together, a small house they were fixing up on the outskirts of Harrisonburg. Alicia had grown up in the Shenandoah Valley, the daughter of a close-knit family, and she carried a gentle warmth that made her a natural with the children in her classroom. She taught students with learning disabilities, a job that demanded patience and a steady kindness, and by all accounts, she was exactly where she was meant to be. Friends described her as responsible, cheerful, and deeply devoted to her family. She was not the sort of person who took risks or ventured into unknown situations. On the morning of March 2nd, 1996, Alicia woke up with a simple plan for the day. It was a Saturday, sunny and unseasonably mild, with temperatures climbing into the 50s across central Virginia. She intended to drive to Charlottesville to meet her mother for a shopping trip at the Fashion Square Mall. The drive would take her roughly an hour, heading east on U.S. Route 33 before merging onto U.S. Route 29 North, a major 4-lane highway that cuts through the rolling Piedmont countryside, connecting Culpeper, Madison, and Charlottesville. Alicia dressed in a blue denim jumper over a white blouse, slipped on a pair of white sneakers, and gathered her purse. She always wore 2 pieces of jewelry that meant a great deal to her, a gold cross necklace and a gold heart-shaped pendant, and she had them on that morning. She said goodbye to Mark, got into her silver 1992 Mercury Tracer, and pulled out of the driveway sometime before 11 o'clock. She never made it to the mall. When she failed to arrive and did not call, her mother grew concerned, but it was Mark who first sensed that something was terribly wrong. He began calling hospitals and police departments, and by early evening, he had reported her missing. A short time later, a passing motorist spotted a Mercury Tracer on the shoulder of Route 29 south of Culpeper, near the intersection with Route 610, and alerted the authorities. It was Alicia's car. The vehicle was locked, her purse and a shopping list still inside on the passenger seat, and the right front tire was completely flat. There was no sign of a struggle, no indication that she had been forced from the car, and no trace of Alicia herself. The location was a remote stretch of highway bordered by woods and farmland, not the kind of place where a woman traveling alone would normally pull over voluntarily. But the tire was flat, and the car was simply sitting there, as if she had stopped and then vanished. When investigators examined the tire, they made a chilling discovery. The valve core had been deliberately removed, meaning the air had been let out intentionally. This was no ordinary roadside mishap. It appeared someone had sabotaged the vehicle, perhaps after Alicia had already stopped, or used the promise of assistance as a way to get her to pull over in the first place. The implications were immediate and deeply troubling. If someone had disabled her car, then Alicia had likely accepted help from a stranger, and that stranger was now nowhere to be found. Detectives with the Virginia State Police and the Culpeper County Sheriff's Office began canvassing the area, and soon they found a witness who had seen Alicia that afternoon. A truck driver reported passing the same stretch of Route 29 around 11:30 that morning, roughly an hour after she left home. He saw a young woman matching Alicia's description, standing beside a small silver car, engaged in conversation with a man near a white pickup truck parked ahead of hers. The man appeared to be leaning against the truck, and the woman did not seem to be in distress. The truck driver did not think anything of it at the time, but when he later saw news reports of a missing woman, he came forward. His statement was the last confirmed sighting of Alicia Showalter Reynolds. Once the news of the disappearance spread, something else began to happen, something that would reshape the entire investigation. Other women started calling the police to report encounters they had experienced along the same highway on the very same day. One woman told investigators that she had been driving on Route 29 that afternoon when she was flagged down by a man who appeared to be having car trouble. He was standing beside a white pickup truck with what looked like a magnetic business sign on the door, and he gestured for her to stop. She pulled over, and the man explained that his vehicle had broken down and he needed a ride to a nearby payphone. Something about his manner made her uneasy. She declined to let him into her car and drove away. She remembered his face. Another woman came forward and described an almost identical encounter. A third woman reported that she had been approached by a man in a white pickup on a different occasion in the preceding weeks, again on Route 29, again with a story about a breakdown. She too had refused. A fourth woman provided a strikingly similar account. In each case, the man was described as a white male, between 35 and 45 years old, with dark hair, a mustache, and a medium build. The pickup was consistently described as white or light-colored, possibly a Ford or Chevrolet, with some kind of removable sign on the side. The pattern was unmistakable. Somewhere along that corridor, a predator was working the highway, using the pretense of a disabled vehicle to lure women, and Alicia had apparently encountered him on the day she vanished. Based on the witness descriptions, the FBI and Virginia State Police released a composite sketch of the man. It showed a clean-shaven face with a mustache, dark hair combed back, and serious eyes. The sketch was plastered on billboards, distributed to law enforcement agencies across the region, and broadcast on television news programs. Tip lines flooded with calls, but none of them led to an arrest. As days turned into weeks, the search for Alicia became one of the largest in Virginia's recent history. Over 1,000 volunteers fanned out across Culpeper County, walking through fields, searching abandoned barns, and combing the dense woods that lined the highway. The FBI brought an aircraft to scan the terrain from above. Dive teams checked ponds and creeks. Roadblocks were set up, and motorists were questioned. Mark Reynolds, her husband, spent every waking hour coordinating with law enforcement and pleading for the public's help. He was completely cooperative, and investigators cleared him early on, determining that he had been at home in Harrisonburg at the time Alicia disappeared, with no inconsistencies in his account. The family offered a reward, which eventually grew to $50,000, for any information that could bring Alicia home. The case drew national media attention, and the specter of a serial predator operating along a rural Virginia highway captured the public's imagination. But Alicia remained missing, and no credible lead pointed to her whereabouts. That all changed on May 12, 1996, more than 2 months after she vanished. A man walking his dog in a remote area of Culpeper County, along a narrow logging road off Route 610 near the small community of Boston, Virginia, came across a scattering of human remains in a field. The location was roughly 47 miles from where Alicia's car had been found. The terrain was overgrown, not far from a creek, and the remains were skeletal, exposed to the elements. The FBI and state police responded immediately. Using dental records, the medical examiner positively identified the remains as those of Alicia Showalter Reynolds. The cause of death could not be determined because of the advanced state of decomposition, but the manner of death was ruled a homicide. Alicia had been murdered, and her body had been discarded in a place where it might never have been found had the dog not wandered in that direction. The gold cross necklace and the heart-shaped pendant were not recovered. They have never been located. In the weeks that followed, investigators returned to the theories they had been developing, and the scope of the investigation widened. The possibility that Alicia's killer was responsible for other crimes along the Route 29 corridor became a central line of inquiry. The FBI and Virginia State Police established a multi-jurisdictional task force dedicated to examining a series of unsolved disappearances and murders of women in Central Virginia, including the case of Alicia Reynolds. Among those they looked at were the May 1996 murders of Julianne Williams and Lolly Winans, two hikers found slain in Shenandoah National Park, as well as the 1997 disappearance of Carolyn McDaniel from a group home in Orange County, and several other cases that shared geographic proximity. If you have been following this story and want to see cases like Alicia's receive the sustained attention they deserve, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel. Every subscription helps bring these unsolved cases to a wider audience, and someone out there may hold the information that could finally bring a resolution. The task force spent years pursuing leads, interviewing witnesses, and comparing forensic evidence across case files. Behavioral profilers from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit were consulted, and they developed a picture of an organized offender who was comfortable in rural settings, likely familiar with the back roads of Culpeper and surrounding counties, and who used a ruse that allowed him to select his victims without raising suspicion. The deliberate removal of the tire valve core suggested planning and an understanding of how to create a scenario that would leave a woman stranded and receptive to help. Despite this, no forensic evidence from Alicia's car or the recovery site ever pointed definitively to a single individual. DNA analysis was limited by the state of the remains and the passage of time. The composite sketch remained the best lead, but it never produced a name. Dozens of men were investigated, their photographs compared to the sketch, their whereabouts on March 2nd, 1996, scrutinized. Not one could be connected to the crime. The task force ultimately concluded that there was insufficient evidence to link Alicia's case to any other homicide, though they could not rule out the possibility that the same perpetrator was responsible for multiple crimes. The Route 29 corridor cases remain a source of enduring speculation and unease, and the idea that a serial predator once stalked that highway has never been disproven. Over time, the investigation lost momentum. Leads slowed to a trickle, and then they stopped entirely. Alicia's file was never closed, but it moved from active status to the cold case unit of the Virginia State Police. The composite sketch faded from public memory, though it remains on file, a ghost of a face that may still mean something to someone. Mark Reynolds, who had been thrust into a nightmare that defied closure, eventually channeled his grief into advocacy. He became involved with search and recovery organizations, volunteering with groups like the Laura Recovery Center, and he traveled to help other families whose loved ones had vanished. His public statements over the years reflected a man determined to find meaning in tragedy, but he never stopped waiting for the phone to ring with news about his wife's killer. Alicia's family continued to mark anniversaries, to keep her photograph in circulation, and to remind the public that her case was still unsolved. The question of who took her life remains unanswered. The man in the white pickup has never been identified. No arrest has ever been made, and no suspect has ever been publicly named by law enforcement in connection with the murder of Alicia Showalter Reynolds. The physical evidence gathered from her car and the field where she was found has been preserved in the hope that advances in forensic technology might one day yield a break. The official record contains witness statements, tire valve, scattered bones, and the absence of a resolution. The Virginia State Police maintain a tip line dedicated to the case, and the $50,000 reward remains available for information leading to an arrest and conviction. As of today, the investigation is classified as open and ongoing, but inactive pending new evidence. The road where Alicia's car was abandoned looks much the same as it did in 1996, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through fields and forests, carrying travelers who may have no idea that a young woman's life ended somewhere nearby. Alicia Showalter Reynolds was 24 years old when she pulled over to help a stranger on a sunny March afternoon. Her story is a reminder that some roads hold secrets, and that for one family in Virginia, the long wait for justice has stretched into decades with no end in sight. What is known is that she was taken against her will, that her killer left her in a lonely field, and that a man in a white pickup truck once roamed Route 29 looking for women to stop. What remains unknown is his name, his motive, and whether he ever answered for any other crime. And that is where a case stands today, unresolved, unforgotten, and officially unsolved. In the years that followed the discovery of Alicia's remains, the corridor along U.S. Route 29 took on a darker identity in the minds of those who lived and traveled through central Virginia. The composite sketch of the unknown man with the mustache and the serious eyes seemed to hang over every gas station bulletin board and rest stop notice, a silent reminder that someone had gotten away with murder on a sunny Saturday afternoon. For the family of Alicia Showalter Reynolds, the passage of time brought no relief. Mark Reynolds continued to work with investigators, but he also turned outward, seeking to transform his personal tragedy into something that could help other families who found themselves trapped in the same unbearable limbo. He trained with Texas EquiSearch and later with the Laura Recovery Center, a nonprofit organization founded by the parents of a murdered child, dedicated to assisting in searches for missing persons. In that capacity, Mark traveled to other states to walk fields and woods where loved ones had vanished, carrying with him the terrible knowledge of what it feels like to wait for a body to be found. He gave interviews on local news stations on significant anniversaries, his voice measured and worn but never giving way to bitterness, always asking the public to look again at the sketch, to think back to that day in 1996, and to come forward if they remembered anything at all. Alicia's mother, Sadie Showalter, and her father, Roger Showalter, retreated from the public eye but continued to cooperate with law enforcement every time a new lead surfaced. They kept Alicia's photograph in their home, the same photograph the media circulated for years, showing a young woman with shoulder-length brown hair, a warm smile, and the kind of unguarded look that speaks to a life not yet touched by violence. In Harrisonburg, the community where Alicia taught, her colleagues at Smithland Elementary School planted a small memorial garden in her honor, a quiet space with a bench and a plaque bearing her name. It became a place where her students, who had been too young to understand what happened, could later return as adults and remember the teacher who had been taken from them so suddenly. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit had by then refined their profile of the offender, and while the specifics of the profile were not fully released to the public, elements did emerge through law enforcement briefings and news reports. Profilers believed the man was likely a resident of the region, someone who knew the back roads and the rhythm of the countryside intimately enough to choose a remote dumping ground that would not easily be discovered. The removal of the valve core from Alicia's tire indicated a calculated approach. A man who understood that a woman alone on a highway would be more likely to accept help with a flat tire than she would to stop for any other reason. The white pickup truck, described by multiple witnesses, became the focal point of the public appeal. The magnetic sign mentioned by one of the women who had escaped could have been a decoy, something to make the truck look like a work vehicle, rendering it invisible among the countless farm trucks and contractor vehicles that use rural highways every day. Investigators chased down leads on white pickups registered in several surrounding counties. They interviewed men who owned similar vehicles. They cross-referenced criminal records for any individual with a history of predatory behavior along highways. The search yielded no arrests. In the late 1990s, the Virginia State Police formed the multi-agency task force that I mentioned earlier, a dedicated unit that met regularly to share information about unsolved homicides and missing persons cases in the Piedmont region. The task force included representatives from the FBI, the Culpeper County Sheriff's Office, the Albemarle County Police Department, the Orange County Sheriff's Office, and several other jurisdictions. They sat down together in conference rooms with maps spread across tables, placing pins where women had been approached, where Alicia's car was found, and where her body had been discarded. They looked for geographic patterns, for timing, for any overlap with known offenders who had been incarcerated or had moved away. Among the cases examined closely was the disappearance of Carolyn McDaniel from Orange County in 1997. McDaniel was 20 years old and had been living at a group home for developmentally disabled adults when she vanished after going for a walk. Her remains were later found in a wooded area of Orange County. The proximity to Route 29 and the nature of the crime drew attention, but no forensic link to Alicia's case was ever established. Another case that received scrutiny was the 1996 murders of Julianne Williams and Lolly Winans in Shenandoah National Park, which falls within the same broad region of Virginia. While the National Park case had its own set of leads and suspects, including a man who was later convicted of an unrelated murder and long considered a person of interest, investigators never found evidence connecting Williams and Winans to the Route 29 cases. The task force also examined the case of Morgan Harrington, a Virginia Tech student who disappeared in 2009 and was later found murdered near Charlottesville, a crime that would eventually be linked by DNA to a suspect in a separate 2014 abduction. That suspect was tried and convicted, but he had no connection to the events of 1996, and Alicia's file remained separate. The lack of a forensic link across these cases meant that, in the absence of a unified theory, the Route 29 corridor might have been the hunting ground of multiple predators, not just one. This realization did little to comfort the communities that lined the highway. The town of Culpeper, a historic seat with brick sidewalks and a courthouse that dates to the early 19th century, found itself at the center of a story that residents did not ask for and did not want. For a time, the fear was palpable. Women who had driven Route 29 alone their entire lives began checking their tires before getting on the road. Mothers warned their daughters not to stop for anyone, no matter how convincing the story. Local mechanics spoke to reporters about the unusual nature of the valve core removal, explaining that the average motorist would not think to check for sabotage, that a flat tire on a busy Saturday afternoon would simply appear to be an inconvenience. That detail haunted the community because it meant the trap had been set for anyone, that Alicia had done nothing careless or unwise, that any woman traveling alone that day could have been the victim. In Charlottesville, where Alicia had intended to shop with her mother, the case became part of the city's collective memory of violence against women, alongside the Harrington case and others that would come later. The University of Virginia campus, situated on the edge of Charlottesville, was not far from the Route 29 corridor, and safety advisories were issued to students warning them of the potential danger that still existed on the rural highways surrounding the city. Although no suspect was ever named in Alicia's case, the composite sketch remained one of the most widely circulated images in the state's cold case files. Over the years, the Virginia State Police re-released the sketch at intervals, hoping that time might have loosened the tongue or weakened the loyalty. In 2001, on the 5th anniversary, renewed media blitz brought in a fresh wave of tips, but none panned out. In 2006, marking 10 years, a dedicated website was launched by the family with support from law enforcement, featuring the sketch and a timeline of the case. Visitors to the site could submit tips anonymously. The site remained active for years, though the frequency of submissions dwindled. By the time the 15th anniversary arrived in 2011, the investigation had effectively gone cold, but the Virginia State Police Bureau of Criminal Investigation's Appomattox Field Office maintained the case file in an active status, meaning it was not relegated to storage, but rather kept accessible for any detective who might find a new angle. Forensic technology, particularly the evolution of DNA analysis, offered a sliver of hope. The evidence collected from Alicia's car and from the scene where her remains were found had been preserved and cataloged. As methods improved, detectives resubmitted items for testing. Touch DNA, which was not available in 1996, became a standard technique. In the 2010s, investigators confirmed that they were re-examining evidence from the case using advanced forensic methods, though they did not disclose the results. The state police have never publicly stated whether a usable DNA profile of an unknown male was recovered from any of the evidence. What is known is that no match has ever been announced. No profile has been entered into Cody's that resulted in an identification, and no suspect has been eliminated through forensic science alone. The composite sketch remains the primary identifier of the person who approached Alicia that day. At some point, the case was also reviewed by the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, known as VICIP, a database designed to identify patterns and linkages across violent crimes nationwide. Investigators entered the details of Alicia's abduction and murder into the system, hoping that a similar methodology in another state might produce a name. Whether any potential matches surfaced has not been disclosed to the public. The families of victims often speak of the parallel existence they lead after a murder, one foot in the present and one forever anchored to the day everything changed. For Mark Reynolds, that meant attending weddings and family gatherings where Alicia's absence was a physical presence. Years after her death, he remarried, a decision that those who knew him understood as a step forward, not a betrayal, and he continued his advocacy work with a steady commitment. In interviews, he said that he had accepted he might never know what happened, but that he refused to let that uncertainty consume him. Still, on the anniversary of Alicia's disappearance, he would sometimes drive that stretch of Route 29, past the spot where her mercury tracer was found, past the turnoff onto Route 610 that leads into the countryside where her body lay hidden for 2 months, and he would think about the man who had taken her and wonder if he was still alive. Alicia's parents, Sadie and Roger, had to navigate a grief that was compounded by the lack of resolution. They attended church, they leaned on their faith, and they cooperated with the investigators who periodically called with updates that amounted to very little. They were never offered the closure that an arrest might bring, the chance to sit in a courtroom and face the person responsible. That particular form of torment is familiar to the families of the many unsolved homicides that accumulate in cold case units across the country. Sadie Showalter spoke in a rare public statement about the emptiness of not knowing, saying that she still expected to see Alicia walk through the door, even years later, and that the pain did not diminish, but simply became a part of who she was. The city of Harrisonburg, where Alicia lived and worked, eventually moved on in the way that all places must. Smithland Elementary continued to serve its students, and new teachers filled the classroom where Alicia once worked, though a small plaque in the faculty lounge ensured that her name was not forgotten. The memorial garden remained, and on certain days, former students would stop by and read the inscription, a quiet tribute to a teacher who made a difference. In Culpeper, the case became a chapter in local history, the kind of story that longtime residents would recount to newcomers when the topic of unsolved crimes came up. The field off Route 610, where Alicia's remains were found, stayed largely unchanged, though the exact spot was known only to law enforcement and the landowner. The community's sense of violation never fully dissipated. Rather, it settled into a low-grade wariness that returned whenever a new missing person poster appeared in the window of a convenience store along the highway. The broader implications of Alicia's case resonated with the public because they touched on a universal fear. She was doing something ordinary, driving to meet her mother for a shopping trip, when a stranger with a deliberate and predatory plan intersected with her life. The fact that multiple women had encountered the same man and escaped only deepened the sense that the outcome could have been different, that the killer had been hunting along that road for some time, and that Alicia was not his first attempt, but the one who did not get away. The composite sketch, with its mustache and its direct gaze, became a kind of spectral image in the region's true crime consciousness, popping up on television specials and in newspaper retrospectives every few years. In 2016, the 20th anniversary prompted another round of media coverage, and the Virginia State Police once again asked the public for help, emphasizing that even a small detail could make the difference. By that time, social media had transformed the way cold cases were publicized, and Alicia's story circulated on Facebook pages dedicated to unsolved crimes, generating occasional comments from people who thought they recognized the sketch or who speculated about possible connections to other cases. None of this online attention produced a viable lead, but it kept the story alive in a digital space where memory can persist indefinitely. The town of Culpeper, the county that shares its name, and the communities stretching north toward Charlottesville have all had to live with the knowledge that someone among them may have harbored killer, or that a transient predator passed through and left devastation in his wake. The economic life of the corridor did not change. The highway remains a vital artery for commuters, students, and farmers hauling produce to market. Truck stops and diners still serve the traffic, and a traveler today would see nothing to indicate that a murder took place there decades ago. The families, however, carry a different map. For them, Route 29 is not just a highway. It is the place where their daughter, their wife, their teacher was taken. And the field in Culpeper County is not just a field. It is a grave that held Alicia for more than 2 months while they searched and prayed. The fear that gripped the community has mellowed into a somber awareness, but whenever a woman in Central Virginia goes missing, the name Alicia Showalter Reynolds is invoked as a warning and a reminder that some dangers remain unseen. The Virginia State Police Cold Case Unit maintains the tip line, and the reward of $50,000 still stands, funded by the family and by community donations that were never withdrawn. Every once in a while, a detective will pull the file, review the witness statements, look at the sketch, and make a few calls to see if anything has changed. That is the rhythm of a cold case, a cycle of silence punctuated by brief flurries of activity. The composite sketch is now digitally aged, updated to reflect what the man might look like as an older adult, though such age progression images are inherently speculative. The hope is that someone, perhaps a relative who was too young in 1996 to understand what they saw, will recognize the face and come forward. The reality is that the man may be dead, incarcerated for an unrelated crime, or living a life that appears utterly ordinary. Until that unknown factor is resolved, Alicia's case will remain exactly what it is today. What is known is that on March 2nd, 1996, a kind and responsible young teacher was abducted from the side of a road, that she was murdered and left in a remote field, and that her killer has never been identified. What remains unknown is who that man was, whether he took other lives, and why he chose Alicia. The burden of that not knowing is borne by a family who loved her, a husband who rebuilt his life around a void, and a series of small Virginia towns where the memory of what happened has become a permanent part of the landscape. The case is open, the file is on a shelf, the sketch is in the system, and the justice that Alicia Showalter Reynolds deserves has not yet arrived. If you found value in this story, please consider hitting subscribe and leaving a like, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next real cold case investigation. We truly appreciate your support. Thanks for listening and watching.